Throughout the Second World War in Hitler's Germany, there were thousands of people who were executed in a number of different ways. When Hitler seized control, the axe was still being used in Germany as an execution method, but he would attack dissent and resistance to his Nazi party with brutality and bloodshed. There were huge numbers of people who were persecuted and attacked for their heritage and religious beliefs. There were some guillotines in Germany, which were used to take the lives of those who did dissent, and some executions using this device were performed in just a matter of seconds. But Hitler would take action specifically against religious groups, for example Jehovah's Witnesses, and those whose beliefs would bring them into conflict with Hitler's politics. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, refused to fight in the German army, and many of these people were sent to concentration camps. But priests were also attacked and imprisoned, and at Dachau there were scores of priests who were persecuted and treated terribly by the SS guards there. There was one priest who belonged to the missionary oblates of Mary Immaculate, and he was executed using the guillotine inside of a German prison after he was declared a traitor. Join us today as we look at the horrific execution of the priest guillotined by Hitler, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Friedrich Lorenz was born in 1897 and was a son of a postman. He was born in what today is Lower Saxony, and in 1902 his family moved to Hildesheim. It was here that he discovered the missionary oblates of Mary Immaculate. This was part of the Catholic Church, and they took their traditional religious vows of poverty, obedience and chastity. They abstained and vowed perseverance until death. A superior general in Rome directs the activities and actions of the members, who are today still found all over the world. They go to different areas and conduct missionary work, and try to convert people to their way of thinking. It was found following the French Revolution, as the founder wanted to bring back the Church in France, and the Catholic strength, and then the Pope granted approval to it in 1826. Friedrich Lorenz would take part in the actions of the group, and he then went to a boarding school for the religious group in the Netherlands from 1911 to 1916. He also joined the training of others in the church, and he worked at the monastery, but then he was called into the German army. As the First World War gripped Europe, Friedrich Lorenz, regardless of his religious beliefs, was called up to service in the conflict. He fought on the Western Front in the trenches as a corporal, as he rose throughout the ranks, and also fought as a non-commissioned officer. He was rather decorated as a soldier, and for bravery he was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. But as the war came to an end, he returned yet again to the monastery and took his eternal vows on the 25th of July, 1923. He went further and a year later was ordained as a priest by the Bishop of Fulda. But Friedrich then began a job inside of the mission. However, he found it difficult to deliver sermons and services, and he was transferred to a different region. But when Hitler came to power inside of Nazi Germany, the Nazis claimed power over all social activity, including religion. Because of this, the Catholic Church suffered persecution, and members of the clergy and priests were sent to concentration camps. Catholic schools, Catholic trade unions and other organisations were shut down. Monasteries and convents were also closed and were taken control of. It was said that the various Christian churches were systematically cut off from effective communication with people. They were confined as far as possible to the performance of narrowly religious functions, and even within this narrow sphere were subjected to as hindrances as the Nazis dared to impose. These results were accomplished partly by legal and partly by illegal and terroristic means. Hitler quickly moved to eliminate any political aspect of the Catholic Church, and thousands of members of the German Centre Party were also arrested. It was said that it quickly became clear that Hitler intended to imprison the Catholics, as it were, in their own churches. They could celebrate Mass and retain their rituals as much as they liked, but they could have nothing at all to do with German society otherwise. Catholic schools and newspapers were closed, and a propaganda campaign against the Catholics was launched. The Nazis also ordered their sterilisation law, which was seen as deeply offensive by the Catholics in Germany, and there were many executed during the Night of the Long Knives. There was a fair bit of Catholic resistance, and Himmler tasked the SS with attacking the Catholic Church. But as mentioned, the clergy, nuns and others were targeted, and many were rounded up on false charges, with priests being closely watched and then deported to concentration camps. In 1940, there was a dedicated priest barracks at Dachau, and there was mass intimidation of the clergy, with some cardinals even being fired at and shot at. So Hitler was at war with the Catholic Church, but Friedrich Lorenz, as the Second World War broke out, had to return to the military. Despite the fact he was a priest, he was drafted back and was seen as a skilled soldier from the First World War. He would perform admirably again in the German military and was given the Iron Cross again for bravery. But in 1940 he returned to his congregation. It's not known if he escaped and fled from his regiment, but then back home he took part in acts of resistance. Here he became part of the Wednesday Circle, which was a resistance group made up of men from the Stettin parish. Here they would speak about defiance to the Nazis and Hitler, but having meetings like this was seen as treason in the eyes of the Nazis. There were other groups such as the Kreisau Circle who held similar meetings, and many of these were rounded up and imprisoned and sent to concentration camps. But on the 4th of February 1943, the Wednesday Circle's meeting was stormed by the Gestapo, and many officers arrested around 40 people who were attending the illegal meeting, and one of those arrested was Friedrich Lorenz. He was then sent to prison and was interrogated for information about his actions, and he was sent to Torgau, where he was placed on trial. He was accused of a number of crimes, such as undermining the fighting forces, helping the enemy, and listening to enemy broadcasts, and for this his sentence was already decided before he even entered the courtroom. The People's Court would sentence many people to death for their defiance or refusal to conform to the Nazi beliefs, and this courtroom usually resulted in Nazi judges screaming in the faces of the defendants. But Friedrich Lorenz, despite the fact he'd served Germany well in 2 world wars, was sentenced to death and was to be executed. He did appeal this, but the request for clemency was rejected in September 1944, and he was left in prison for a number of months before he was to be executed. Friedrich was held inside of Halle Prison, and one former prisoner described his time there in the execution chamber as, "This prison is huge, it's a house of correction. Up to now life had been fairly easy except for the occasional thump or kick, but things changed. You were really in enemy territory. My job was in a room immediately above the condemned cells in the guillotine. We had to count 7 pieces of paper and 5 envelopes and put them in one brown envelope. These were for the troops. One morning I was stacking my work by the door when a guard hauled me outside and down some stairs to get some baskets. The guard could speak French fairly well. He pointed to some black curtains and told me I was in for it. He then pulled the curtains and showed me this huge monstrosity, the guillotine, a shining, terrifying piece of machinery. I was glad to get back upstairs. The first Wednesday afternoon a hush came over the room at 3 p.m. Then I heard a thump and counted 21 thumps. I was told they were executing. It was on this very guillotine that Father Friedrich Lorenz was executed. On the 13th of November 1944 at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, he was taken from his prison cell into the execution chamber. He was handed over to the executioner's assistant and was quickly strapped to a wooden board and his arms were secured. He was then taken over to the guillotine where he was rapidly slid under a blade before the executioner made a few final checks and released the blade, instantly beheading and executing the Catholic priest. Father Friedrich Lorenz was a man who at a number of times in his life went against his religious beliefs to serve in the German armed forces. But ultimately he went against Hitler and took part in a number of dissenting meetings, which was considered treason within Germany. Lorenz's story is one which is not the most well known, but it is one that certainly deserves to be told. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.